Thank you, everyone, for being here. It was exciting to get this invitation from the Forest Stewards Guild right after we had published this paper. My name is Shadi Atallah. I'm currently at the University of Illinois, but I moved here in 2020 from the University of New Hampshire, where this work was conducted. It's a very New Hampshire relevant and Maine relevant problem, but also we do have that problem also in the Midwest to a lesser extent. So to acknowledge my co-authors, two of them are in the room. Jessica Leahy from the University of Maine and Karen Bennett from the University of New Hampshire. And my third co-author is Zhuchen Huang, who's an environmental economist at the University of New Hampshire. So again, this work was born by arriving at the University of New Hampshire, where there were ecologists working on the glossy buckthorn. I had worked previously on disease management across boundaries in the agricultural context. And so the problem sounded like it had a lot of similarities in terms of what would incentivize a farmer or a landowner to control in the situation where a disease or invasive species is crossing boundary lines. And I was especially struck by these two maps that you've seen probably repeatedly. The first one that shows the extent of the invasive shrub problem in the United States, especially when this map is overlaid over this other map that is a very famous map by now that shows us that it seems like the problem is occurring more severely in the parts of the country where we have more private land ownership. And so from an economic perspective, that makes us think of situations of coordination, situations of peer effects, etc. In addition, we had learned from the US Forest Service about this typology of landowners, and it made us think of how they care broadly. If we were to categorize things, they care about a bundle of ecosystem services. Some of them are marketed ecosystem services like timber, and non-market ecosystem services like recreation and wildlife preservation. And so when we have different agents that have different motivations dealing with a problem that crosses jurisdictions, the first thing we would like to understand is the preferences of landowners. So essentially, that means what drives their willingness to control. And so in that particular case, it's the glossy buckthorn in southern Maine and New Hampshire, and the choice of the location has to do with the fact that glossy buckthorn seems to be very prevalent under white pine forests. So in addition to understanding broadly what would motivate control, we're very interested in this question of peer effects, because it's not clear ex ante whether peer effect will act in a beneficial way or in a less beneficial way. So from economic theory, we have reasons to believe that you could either have a situation of, if my neighbor controls, I'm less likely to control, because maybe I'm free riding on the efforts of my neighbor, that's broadly speaking. Or it could also be that if my neighbor is controlling, then they already invested in that some of these costs, and now it's less costly, and perhaps I have a higher return on control on my land if others are controlling as well. So it's not clear. The literature is mixed. Sometimes we observe free riding, sometimes we observe peer effects that stimulate control. And I'm talking about the literature broadly speaking, agriculture and forestry, not specific to forestry. And more importantly, we would like to disaggregate that willingness to control the invasive shrub and the willingness to pay for it and likelihood of controlling by the control methods that are available for controlling, the ecosystem service benefits that I will get as a return on my control, and that neighborhood effect. Before I move on, I would like to say that people are more than free to interrupt me and ask questions. We are a smaller group, and so if you have a question, feel free to, I think, to if Xander agrees, feel free to unmute and ask me questions as I go. And so the application, if there are no questions so far, I will describe the application being the glossy buckthorn, a shrub that is transmitted through birds and small mammals using the berries of the glossy buckthorn. And what it does to a habitat is to aggressively colonize it. It has a preference for white pine forest in the context of New Hampshire and Maine. And it causes different types of damages. It reduces songbird abundance. It affects ability to hike on one's land, and it reduces the timber regeneration through the shading of the glossy buckthorn to the juveniles that are regenerating white pine in that context. Management, there are a series of techniques that have been researched that can be categorized, broadly speaking, as either mechanical or chemical strategies. So knowing where it happens, what are the damages, and what are some of the solutions, we wanted to know which of these damages matter the most, and which of these methods, chemical versus mechanical, are most attractive to landowners. Now, how do we do that? In the old days, we would go and directly ask someone, what is your willingness to pay for something? But methods have evolved, and the preferred method nowadays is to include an experiment within a survey. So we call that a choice experiment, where you give people a series of choices that have costs associated with them. In that case, it's a choice to control using different methods with different benefits of control. And so that's what we do here. So we design a choice experiment on glossy buckthorn options that vary in their control methods and the ecosystem benefits they provide, and in the neighborhood adoption rate for each respondent, and of course, in the cost, because it is a willingness to pay study. So the survey of landowners targeted landowners in southern Maine and New Hampshire, and that is related to this situation when I mentioned earlier that there is this observation that glossy buckthorn is more likely under white pine forest. So we thought we are more likely to find people who have dealt with the problem, or are more likely to deal with it in the future. Then the survey proceeded like a very classical structure. The first section on questions about the property. The second section, questions on the knowledge of the invasive species and what they're currently doing. And then the last section, as usual, is the demographic questions. The difference here is that we have a choice experiment, so that's section C, and I'll describe it in a second. And so a very classical survey with the difference that in the middle there is an experiment where people make choices which tell us something about their preferences. And so it's a hypothetical choice experiment. It's called hypothetical choice experiment because there's no real monetary transaction in the experiment as you would see in a lab experimental setting, right? And so here the costs, they were not actually asked to pay, but they were told, would you be willing to pay? And how much would you be willing to pay? And the methods have evolved so much so that there are a lot of quality checks that we can improve, that we can include in the survey so that we don't worry too much about the hypothetical bias. And so we can, this method is very well established, and if done well, it compares very well with the methods that do involve actual monetary transactions. We conducted 2 focus group meetings. The one in Maine was led by Jessica, who's here, and the one in New Hampshire was led by Karen, who is also here. And we used these focus group meetings to improve the survey language, but most importantly, to make sure that the choices that we give respondents are relevant to the situations that they deal with. So basically, making sure that we have the right variables, essentially. We conducted the survey both by web and by mail. So let me move on to what the experiment looks like. It's not super intuitive at first sight, which is why the survey includes a lot of description. So the way this works is that you are given an option. You are being told, would you choose option A or option B or neither? Where option A in this context consists of you have glossy buckthorn, and you have this option to control it using chemical methods. So that's the fact. So the first variable is it's not a mechanical method, it is a chemical method. And then you're told that as a result of this control, you will not have any timber benefit, but your trails, you'll have 20% more usable trails because you controlled. Wildlife is maintained at the current level, there is no improvement, and 50% of your neighbors are controlling. Are you willing to pay $550 per acre for this option? Versus you have a mechanical option that will get you 5% improvement in timber, no improvement in trade usability, and an increased opportunity to view wildlife, and all of your neighbors are controlled. Which one would you like? And people can choose either A or B or neither. And then people are given a series of these options, and you can see how by varying the levels of these attributes, so mechanical was 0-1, chemical 0-1 is either this or that. Timber harvest, the benefits varied from 5 to 20%. The usable trades from 5 to 20%, neighborhood rates from 50 to 100%, and then the costs from $150 to $750 per acre per treatment. And so you can see by providing different versions of that covers all of these values, then you have enough variation in all of these variables, and you are able to determine when they pick this versus that over the multiple choices, you are able to determine what matters the most for their choices. So as I mentioned, the survey was both web and mail in New Hampshire and southern Maine. We included in the survey a glossy buckthorn information pamphlet to make sure that people knew what we were talking about. Many invasive shrubs might look alike, so we wanted to make sure they had information on what it is, what it looks like, and all the slide that I showed earlier, what it does to the habitat and the damages and the control. They had all of that information. They were given incentives that are typical to reach a high response rate. We conducted that at the beginning of 2019, and we were very happy with the response rate. I was telling Xander yesterday, since I moved to Illinois, I can never get a response rate that high. And so that was really, really nice to get such a high response rate. Now notice that the analysis, I mean, if you're interested in the analysis component, the analysis is not the respondent, but the multiple choices of respondents. And so we had 2,585 observations, and these are the number of choices that people have made, because each individual will make multiple choices in their survey. So I'll present first what we find from the survey as a whole. So what is our surveyed population? Some of these variables might be interesting broadly speaking to understand what people are doing about invasive species. And then I will present then the results of what did we learn about their preferences and their willingness to pay. So the way to read these numbers, think of those as percentages. So 40% of the respondents were female, 38% were retired. The mean age was 61. These are percentages of different educational attainments. In the focus group, we were told by certain households, I would never want to use chemicals because I have my grandchildren come and visit me on a regular basis. So we included that question to use it as a proxy. If we see an aversion to use chemicals and want to understand whether that's driven by health reasons or environmental reasons. And that was the reason we included this question, and 50% of the people had answered yes. And then a bunch of other questions to make sure, are preferences driven by earlier involvement in invasive species shrub or something different. So we asked questions, have you ever volunteered for a project that control invasive species? We had income, land size it turns out land size is very important. So the mean was 13 acres, but with a very large standard deviation. So the median was around 4 acres. So we had very large sizes of land and then smaller sizes of land. 18% of the risk. So I think these are interesting, broadly speaking, regardless of the other for the analysis, but just to understand how people use their land and how they have thought about glossy buckthorn, whether they have experienced it. So 18% have done a commercial harvest in the last 10 years. 27% had trails on their property. 40% of them think that recreation is important. 12% had glossy buckthorn on their property. But not all of them had done anything about it. So 9% had initiated some control to control the glossy buckthorn on the property. So you can see here that there's some level of inaction, which is one of the justification of the study is like, if you have it, but you don't control, why is that? And 2% new neighbors that had it and controlled it. So that's also important to see if that variable turns out to be important to observe if neighborhood matters. And then the last one is, have you gotten any cost share payments to help you with control? And only 1% had taken advantage of equip payments to cover the cost of their control. And so there are a lot of questions that come up here. Why are people not taking advantage of the equip program? And this low level of use of equip is across applications. It's not only relevant here. We see it also with cover cropping in corn and soybean. We see it everywhere. So it's not specific here, but it was important to observe it. And the other one is why do some people have glossy buckthorn, but they do not control it? So maybe they don't know what the damages are. Maybe they don't know what the returns on control consists of. And so I'm going to move now to the results of the choices themselves. These were the descriptive statistics of the sample. Before I move on to the responses and the preferences, the analysis of the willingness to pay, I would like to pause and see if maybe there are some interesting questions here regarding the descriptive statistics. Maybe there's some discussion to be had. Is anything surprising? Is something everybody knew? But is there any initial reaction?
I had one question. So the government program variable is just for glossy buckthorn controls?
Yes. Have you ever used any government program such as equip to help you recover the cost of controlling glossy buckthorn? Yes, it was specific to glossy buckthorn.
Okay, because obviously it's sort of a different study, but it would be interesting to see program participation more generally, because presumably if 18% are involved in commercial timber harvest, I would guess that the sort of some participation in some program would be much higher than 1%, but
yeah, I would expect that too. Yes, so this only speaks to having used equip for the sake of I will double check if we have the question both for glossy buckthorn and more generally speaking, because I agree with you, it would be surprising if it's 1%, if it's equip in general.
I can chime in a little bit about the Maine situation, and I hope it doesn't derail the conversation down a different path, because I can go on about this problem, but there are some real hurdles in Maine right now with NRCS programs. They have a lot of money, and one of the pinch points that we have is, of the 800 licensed foresters in the state of Maine, only 55 are technical service providers able to aid landowners into these programs. So there's already the constraint. And then we get into individuals at that point. Of the 55, there's a number who are active, not active. They might be recently retired. I'm listed as a TSP because I bring it into my classroom here and make sure the students know it, but I'm not writing. I'm not helping any landowners get into it. So we're down to 54 right there. But I think it's maybe in the, the open discussion part, we can just talk about these, if we really want to address invasive plants. It's not just landowners wanting to do it. There's these other constraints to the system working. So I don't know if 1%'s that number, but I do know, at least for Maine, it is really because first you got to get the forest management plan, and then you can access all these programs, but there's constraints.
Hi, I could weigh in from New Hampshire. I think it's not dissimilar, although I feel we may have greater adoption of TSPs by our consulting foresters. But one other pinch point, whether they're TSPs or not, is whether they have the either the interest or the experience in controlling invasives, so that not all TSPs would be addressing invasives, whether they be glossy buckthorn or some other invasive.
That's great. And we had somebody weigh in on Indiana experiencing somewhat similar issues. So it sounds like that's a constraint out there generally. Other questions or comments at this point, or should we keep going? Okay, I'm not seeing other folks on mute, so I think you can keep going.
So I pulled up the question, and so the question is not glossy buckthorn specific, but it is invasive plant specific. So the question was stated: have you used governmental financial assistance or cost sharing programs to help control invasive plants on your property in the last 10 years? So that 1% is specific to invasive plants.
Okay, thank you.
And so the results, I will state them verbally first, and then if there are people who would like to look at the numbers, I will do that later, but I would like to get out the main results first. The first main result we find is that there's a strong liking for mechanical methods and strong disliking of chemical methods. We had sensed that in the focus groups, and then we confirmed that in the study. So this is, remember, the first two attributes of the choice was, do you want a mechanical method or a chemical method? And those were explained in the pamphlet. And so systematically, we see that people liked the chemical removal of the glossy buckthorn relative to the chemical control of the glossy buckthorn. The second main result is that improved timber production and wildlife viewing as a result of control were the most important motivators for controlling. The trail variable, like whether controlling is going to improve your ability to recreate on your land, was only a motivator for landowners that have larger acreage. And all else equal, retirees were more likely to choose neither. Remember, you had option A, option B, and then option says, no, thank you, I don't want to do anything. So retirees were more likely to remain in the current situation, that is to choose no alternative. And higher income individuals were more likely to choose one of the alternatives. And importantly, we do find that neighborhood control rate is important. And similar to the trail variable, it is acreage specific. So neighborhood control rate matters, but it decreases as the property size increases. And we find a threshold of 32 acres beyond which it doesn't, the level of control around me starts not to matter anymore. And less than 32 acres, it matters a lot in a positive way, in the sense that if my neighbor controls, I'm more likely to control. And we will discuss in a moment. I would like to hear from everyone, what are some of the implications of these results? Now, let me go into the quantitative version of these results if somebody would like to get into a deeper dive here. So we tried different models. So I think for this discussion, we can focus on model 6, which is the one that has most of the variables we're interested in. And the way you want to see this is look at the coefficient. And positive means that it increases the likelihood of control. Negative means it decreases the likelihood of control. And of course, significance means that we have enough statistical power to be confident with our result. And so this is what I was saying earlier, that mechanical method will increase the likelihood of control. The chemical method are disliked. So that's gonna, if I were to choose chemical method, that's gonna decrease my likelihood of controlling. Timber is positive and significant. Wildlife is positive and significant. Neighborhood control is positive and significant. Initially, we had a negative sign on trade, which caused us to wonder, like, why is it that the benefit that I get from having my trail being more usable would make me less likely to control? That didn't make a lot of sense. And so for that reason, we started interacting with land size. And then we realized then that if we included land size, both for neighborhood and for trail, then these preferences were different according to one's land size. And so these are the same results that I mentioned earlier. Being retired makes me more likely to choose the status quo. Income makes me choose an alternative. And land size matters for whether I cared about my neighborhood and whether I cared the neighborhood control rate, and whether it mattered to me that I'm getting trail benefits of control. So this is what we do typically with these surveys. We get first these estimates that tell us whether something is important for my decision, but the magnitudes don't mean much. Like I can't compare 1.5 with 0.4. We can't compare them like that. But what we do is we transform them into a willingness to pay. Because remember that we're also varying the cost parameters. We have that dollar parameter and the choices. So there's a way to transform these numbers into dollar values. And so looking at a model 6 here, then what you are seeing here is we are disaggregating my willingness to pay into its components. And so what you can see here is this is a $627 per acre willingness to pay if I use a mechanical method. And the negative here means that you would need to pay me $772 for me to even consider using chemical. So this negative just means that I have a disutility of using chemical methods using control. And these are the willingness to pay associated with timber, with trade, with wildlife. Again, trade is negative only because if we look on average, it looks negative, but then once we interact with land size, then it becomes positive, but only for the larger landowners. It's still not clear to me why that would be that for smaller landowners, that would be something that would be negative as opposed to being at least just not significant. But once we interact, as I said, that trail variable with land size, then the results start making sense. And then what's nice about the ability to go from preference parameters to dollars is that then you could do some basic cost benefit analyses. And you can pick, for instance, whatever level of an attribute that you have. For instance, you could say, if somebody were to use mechanical, that's the willingness to pay associated with that technology. If I have 20% increase in timber yield as a result of control, that's how much I'm willing to pay for that. If in a binary way, I couldn't see wildlife anymore because of the glossy buckthorn, and now I can see wildlife, $180. And this one is interesting because remember, it was, the dollar amount was around 1, but the way to interpret that, this is 1 for each percentage point. And so let's say 50% of my neighbors are controlling, and this is the dollar equivalent of that effect in my cost benefit analysis, if we were to disaggregate. And again, people are not doing these in their heads, but this is the way we can disaggregate through their choices, the values of each of these parameters. So what you can see here is that even if you were to include equip, you would still not be incentivized to do the chemical control. And of course, it paid off to control the glossy buckthorn, but only after I have accounted for the 75% cost share of equip. And so we can see here that without equip, it's not cost effective to control, neither with mechanical nor with chemical, but with equip then it's cost effective to control mechanically. And so what that means is that, and we can discuss that in a moment, if we think that chemical control is more effective, it will never be, based on the preferences we observe, even with equip payments, nobody would be using it according to our survey results. Whereas the mechanical method will be preferred, but they are less effective because you need to keep going back to these stumps and cutting them or doing whatever you were doing in a repetitive way. Whereas chemical is an easier, is more effective per unit of application. And I can go back in a moment to these results once you have questions, but in terms of what kind of, you answer one question, then more questions come up. Like, are we, is there a concern that, if you think that chemical methods are more effective, mechanical methods are more preferred because of the preferences of people, then could it be likely that the more environmentally friendly landowners could be acting as the weaker link in the collective control of invasive species? And then, what can be, is there a way in the middle? Like, is there a way to use chemicals judiciously? And then if so, how can we learn, what can we learn from these preferences that are very much against using any chemicals on one's property, and then get to a happy medium if this is desired? The other piece of information is that, and we saw that some people had glossy buckthorn and did not control it at the baseline. And so we're wondering, if we were to wonder, like, what could increase the likelihood of control in terms of extension messaging, it seems that the timber productivity and wildlife viewing are the benefits that people care about the most. So messaging those was more important than messaging the benefit of trail recreation. We saw that these results are acreage specific, so maybe there's extension messaging might need to be also customized to the size of the land, because we saw that trail recreation was not a motivator to control glossy buckthorn for landowners with smaller acreages. And I think one of the most exciting results here is that neighborhood effects matter, but they matter in a way that helps the collective control. So we don't see free riding behavior, but in a sense, we see what we call an economics complementary behavior. So I perceive your control as a complement to mine, and so your control increases the likelihood of my control. And so that has implications for collective action. One thing we had discussed in the past is maybe if the level of control in a certain area is made known to people somehow, then that might increase people's willingness to control. In this context, of course, you wouldn't be able to list it too specifically because of privacy concerns, but at some aggregate way, making this information available seems to be useful for incentivizing control by others. And one might think that this result also probably holds, we don't know, we'll need to test, if it was made known to people that there is control that is happening, say by a federal agency or a state agency. So maybe this result will also hold beyond the fact that it's your neighbor as a landowner, but it could be in your neighborhood there's control happening, even if it's not by a private landowner. If people are interested in getting more details, the article is available. It's open access, so anybody can access it. If anybody would like to look at the data, we have made the data available in the data bank of the University of Illinois. So the survey is there, the pamphlet is there, and all the data that we use to generate these results. In terms of future work, when we finished this paper, I had an interest in using these utility parameters and willingness to pay parameters from the survey, and then using what's called an agent-based model, which is a landscape, spatial dynamic landscape model, where we can ask questions about how the heterogeneity in the preferences of the agents, which in that case were the landowners, matter for the landscape level if we link that to an ecological model that is simulating the effects of my control on my property, but also on the neighboring property. So this is it for my presentation, and I'm happy to open the floor for discussions. I'll probably end on this slide where we have the main results, which is probably where most of the discussion will emerge.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think it's a fascinating study, and certainly generates a lot of thoughts for me. But so I don't dominate, I wanted to take advantage of some expertise on the line here. And Dugan has been typed in a great message in the chat about what they see in Indiana. And so I think just sort of sometimes it's nice to feel like, okay, how far can we extend these results? And obviously Maine and New Hampshire, some particularities, but I get the sense that there's some similarities, and Dugan is confirming that for Indiana. And I'd be curious, and I hope folks don't mind, I just like to call people out here on the line. I know, Erica, you're in Wisconsin. Does this sort of ring true, what Shadi is talking about, based on your experience? I don't know if you're willing to unmute. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think so. We haven't done really a survey of this type. I think definitely there's a movement away from chemicals. So that especially rings true to my experience. And I think the unwillingness to pay as well. We have a lot of folks looking for grant opportunities. So yeah, I would say a lot of this is reflective of what I've seen.
Great. Yeah, thank you. This is sort of a gut check, not, I realize that other folks may not have the data, but I think sometimes that field experience is super useful. I don't know, Brandy, if you want to weigh in from the West Coast, but I'd be curious about your 2 cents on this.
Yeah, sorry, you're up here and my camera is here, so I'm
no, that's okay.
So there are actually 3 of us here. We were all just watching this together.
Great.
And we definitely, like, we kept saying, yep, that tracks, like it all kind of made sense with what we see in the field here in Oregon. I guess one thing we were discussing is how our invasive species program does these sort of collective treatments, where they're calling around to several landowners in one area and saying, hey, we're going to come out and treat upstream of you and downstream of you. Would you be open to having a treatment on your property as well, to kind of like prime the conversation to say like, hey, everyone around you is doing it. And that seems to be effective in getting a treatment done. So that was also something we noticed. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else I missed there? Yeah. So yeah, we see a lot of similarities between these results and the population we deal with as well.
Well, certainly your approach of bundling is supported by this research, right? Like if anyone ever questions that, you can point to this research. And it looked like somebody else unmuted. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to add, so Brett Butler, who does the National Woodland Owner Survey and is quite the expert on family forests, he's got this sort of, I don't know, slogan, motto about landowners are landowners are landowners. And we so often are like, okay, well, this only applies to Maine and New Hampshire. We don't want to expand it. But like family forest landowners are, they have more in common across the country than they have not in common. So I do, if this study resonates, then there's probably other research on family forest owners that might be applicable to your geography, even though it's a different issue or a different thing, because landowners are landowners are landowners.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Lucy, did you want to weigh in?
I came in late, so I didn't hear the whole talk, and I'm planning to listen to the recording. So I think I need to do that before I weigh in.
Okay, but that's a great point. We will have the recording. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and we'll share it with everyone who registered. So if you want to share it out with other folks in your office or something, you'll have that opportunity. And I guess I wanted, maybe building on Jessica's point, I think there's some similarities even as you go to questions of using fire as a tool on private land for habitat improvement, and maybe similar to chemical, where there's some inherent resistance because of the risks or perceived risks. So maybe just echoing that, but I maybe curious about this issue of chemical control being more effective and having, in terms of, say, ecosystem integrity broadly conceived, a lot of benefits, but at least a perception of risk from landowners. And I guess maybe one thought I had was, clearly in the control, there's a neighbor benefit. Seeing your neighbors do control increases your interest in doing it. And I wonder if knowing the methods that are being used nearby might also encourage folks to, well, just to be blunt, if your neighbor is using chemical control and you see that it's effective, would that increase your interest in that mechanism? So just to throw that out, I don't know if Shadi, if you sort of saw that in the data at all, or Jessica or Karen, if you felt like it came up in the focus groups.
Yeah, actually, I should have said that we have a question on, have you observed your neighbor doing controlling the glossy buckthorn? And we drag that variable with the neighborhood variable, and it does indicate that having observed my neighbor do it, so it's not just knowing it, but having observed it. But we did not ask this question separately for whether they observed chemical versus mechanical. But based on the context of the results, you can infer that it was most probably mechanical, because it increased my probability of controlling. If it was chemical, based on the results that we saw, it would have decreased my probability of control. And so we can say from the survey that yes, that complementarity and in the control is driven by having observed my neighbor effectively controlling. Although we don't ask have you observed if it was beneficial or what were the benefits. We just say, have you observed your neighbor control the glossy buckthorn? And it does increase the probability of my control.
Yeah, I'd add that this that particular result, as far as neighbors inspiring other neighbors or informing other neighbors to take action, is supported by how we see our observations of how landowners act. So I think this study confirms that. And we've based much of our extension outreach over the years on the fact that landowners are inspired and motivated by what their neighbors do.
I think it suggests too that we need more mechanisms for being able to find these spaces. So landowners who are willing to allow people to look at what they did and the outcomes over time. It would be pretty challenging for me to, give another landowner a list of places where they could go look at it. So I think in with not just invasive species, but also other climate smart forestry practices, I think we do have to, we should focus, those of us that work on the outreach and extension side of things, of when people are somewhat disconnected, they might talk to their neighbors, they might run into each other at the general store and stuff like that. But being able to go look at things, a variety of forest practices would benefit others.
Yeah, great point. Mark?
One thing that suggests to me from looking at what farmers do, and actually also some practices from the Tree Growers Association. Signage, has been used to let neighbors know what's being done and when it was being done. And I wonder if something like that would be helpful to, take a look and see what how much effect that might have.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Probably similar to the signage we see in different models of turf management, where people will have a sign saying be pollinator friendly, or I do not spray, or things like that, like declaring what you do. I'm curious if Dugan can tell us more about the SISMAs that they're working with, and whether like that would be one mechanism to build on that neighborhood effect result, or is that something very different?
Yeah, sure. So the concept of the SISMA, still known in some parts of the country as like a CWME, a cooperative weed management area. SISMA is the cooperative invasive species management area. So my nonprofit, we have a board of 8 people who are all over the place with agencies, SWCDs, NRCS, county level officials and things. And then we have 6 full-time employees that we broke up Indiana into 6 regions, and we each work with agencies, private landowners, and nonprofits and conservation, and any other partners that we possibly can to form these grassroots self-contained organizations that do a lot of this education about chemical use, about natives, about pollinators, about regenerative forestry or farming techniques. And anywhere that we can talk about invasive species and their impacts and then educate people on them, we go. SWCD field days for farmers and stuff have been really successful to see what other farmers are doing, because a lot of farmers it's a close community. So you get them together, you give them some food and some root beer floats, and you have a couple different people talk about what all they're doing, the good stuff they're doing, the things they're doing to prevent the bad stuff, and gears start turning and they start adapting practices over time. Same with forestry field days. We've done a few of those with SISMAs, especially in Amish country. It's a very contained community, and if one person starts doing something and they see good results, everyone wants to do the same thing. So those have been really helpful. But the idea of these SISMAs is that they know their area more than like they're very specific. Usually it's a county and no larger. They know those areas and those people far better than a state agency or a national agency that has an entire region with 10 to 15, 20 different counties. They can be very much more in tune, and so they're able to address the specific invasive species problems there. They're able to talk to landowners more frequently and more authentically, because they're also residents there, and help them to learn about invasive species, learn about controlling them, learn about best management practices, forestry management practices, and do that at an extremely local level with the assistance of state and federal programs that allow them to have monies to help with that, like EQIP, certified forest programs, things like that. And then my particular group, we've actually designed our landowner surveys for invasive species alongside our national or our state rep for NRCS, so that our surveys and the management plans that we give them afterwards can be used to apply for things like EQIP. We've seen huge success over the last 7 years that we've been in. We have hundreds of thousands of acres in Indiana that are under management plans and are actively being worked on to control invasive species. So it's going good.
That's great. That's a really inspiring story. Thanks for sharing that. And maybe at the risk of putting folks on the spot, I don't know, Jordan, if you want to comment on the North Carolina experience. or anybody else who wants to weigh in, other questions?
I did have a question, both for Maine, Vermont area, but then for the group at large. The willingness to spend money to correct the situation, specifically with buckthorn, but with invasives in general. Are there enough service providers in your areas to actually do that are trained on invasive species management and control? Or is it like there are none in the entire area and best of luck?
There are some, and they are very well engaged and booked out, and there's definite opportunities for particularly foresters who want to have an invasive component to their business, and some of the smaller consulting firms that are expanding to, you know, a second or third person are working, those people are doing mostly chemical control.
Yeah, that's an exact description of the situation in New Hampshire. There are probably half a dozen service providers, whether it be through NRCS or independently, who are fairly aggressive with their invasive control part of their business. I can't really speak to Vermont, but my sense is that there's a goodly number of Vermonters doing that as well.
Yeah, I'd point out a company like Red Start has, I think they run whole summer crews that are working on this sort of stuff.
Yes, and they bleed over into New Hampshire and probably Maine too. I don't know that, but yeah.
One result that I didn't discuss, and that a little bit connects with what Jessica was saying about, despite differences, family landowners might be more homogeneous than we think. So I discussed here the coefficient, but I didn't discuss the standard deviations. And so the way to read the standard deviation is how much disagreement there is about one attribute among the respondents. And so what you see here is that there is no disagreement. So when the standard deviation is not significant, there's no disagreement. When it is significant, there is disagreement. Because remember, you're seeing here, you know, a picture for the whole sample. But the power of this model also is to tell us which of these attributes people disagree on their importance. So you can see here that unanimously people like mechanical, because there's no significance here. But you can see here that the dislike of chemicals is heterogeneous. So people have very different levels of aversion to chemicals. There is also heterogeneity in how much I care about the timber benefit, heterogeneity in the trail. There's no heterogeneity in wildlife. Everybody unanimously cares about that benefit. And so if extension is wondering, okay, we cannot do too much customization for different preferences and different plant sizes, then if you were to pick one ecosystem benefit as a result of control that speaks to everyone, it's definitely the wildlife benefit. And outside of the ecosystem benefit, it's definitely the amount of control in your neighborhood, because that's also not significant, meaning there's no disagreement. So I think that's also one layer of the results that I didn't discuss initially that could be interesting to think about in terms of what message gets across.
That's fascinating, and yeah, I'll be thinking about that all afternoon. But I also want to respect the time. We're right at the top of the hour again. And so I want to take the opportunity to particularly thank you, Shadi. Great presentation. Really glad, I mean, the work itself, a good thing to focus on, and also recognize Karen and Jessica for their part of this. So thank you all. Thanks everybody for participating. And this is a continuing interest of mine in the Forest Stewards Guild. So if there are other topics that you think we could have this sort of conversation on, please let us know. Happy to facilitate. And we'll follow up with an email with a link to the recording And if there are other resources people want to get out to the group, happy to facilitate that. So just drop me an email. So thanks again, and hope to see you on some other event. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for the invitation. Good to meet you all. Good to see you again, Karen.